quite a character. And so they were going up to cruise timber on the Hosney Park there for some softwood. And of course then the only accessibility, it took the railroad up through Beaver River. You got off, I guess they got up there about midnight there in the middle of the winter. And they got up there, and this Fred Potter, I guess, was the caretaker there, relative of the owner, or maybe he was part owner of the land. And his brother, he was a real nice guy, they said, and this Howard Annan, he probably knew those fellows, but I guess he didn't have his greatest personality. So anyway, they got up there this middle of the night. The next morning, they get up there, and as I say, this was in the middle of winter, January, and way below zero. So Howard Annan, he says, well, I understand you boys are pretty tough, used to being in the outdoors, so he said, we'll let you sleep and have this open cabin. It was a lean-to with open side. And so my brother Carl was in charge of the crew there, so he said, Mr. Annan, he said, we'll be taking the next train out of here, because there were other cabins there, full cabins with stove and stuff. He said, if we don't stay in one of them, we will be taking the next train out of here. He said, if we have to, necessity dictates, why we'll stay in the open, but if there's a camp there, we can stay in. We're going to stay there. So I guess after thinking it over, he finally decided that they let him stay in there. But there were bottles of whiskey in there, some full and some partially full. So what did he do? He went in there and he took a chalk, and all the ones that had wine and whiskey, and all the ones that had been opened, he put a chalk mark under the line where the half full or three-quarters. So, okay, so ones that you know, Mickey Freeman especially would appreciate this. So Mick, after the next night he got there, he said, I'll fix that old SOB. He said, so he took this bottle of white wine that was about marked down there, about a quarter of the way, so he guzzled about half of that down there, and then he urinated in the bottle up to the put it back up the shelf. So I imagine Mr. Annan, I don't imagine he ever sampled that.
You know, Eddie, you were speaking of that area there. It's a shame, really, that went the way that it did. We had a job on there on the Hastings. We also had one working on Brandon. You know what it is, flying through the woods, it's all separated. Huey Wilcox was my next door neighbor, and he was a mechanic down. Dan Bozzard had the Brandon job. Well, I wasn't going to get back. Well, in time to make the second line. Heck, I'll go over and see what they're doing over there. They're working down on Potters. I come across the landing, and Huey's working on a machine there. He says, hi, Dwayne. Right? What the hell are you doing here? He said, ever since then, he'll get to talking, especially if he gets a little bit of that wine in it. He'll say, boy, he says, you never know where that guy's going to walk out. We run those lines like 45 from Brantford to Hastings line. That's the first place I ever saw a helio. Potter come in there. Yeah, you come in there with that thing there, the plane with the heel sharp, bend in the tail. Well, if you saw that runway, you'd know why. He got down in there, we went to pick up the guy that's Harry Cole's caretaker. He's supposed to pick him up. I thought to myself, that plane's never going to get out of here. Got down on the end of the runway. Well, all there is just trees and an open strip. That's it. That strip wasn't very long in my way of thinking. He got down the end of the runway, revved it up, pulled the brakes, let it go. Got 2/3 of the way down, stood that plane on end. Then I come to why they had that funny tail on it. That's why it was made that way. They had lots of power. You'd stand them on end and take off on a short runway. You probably saw that too.
No, I didn't see that.
1830, that I'm talking about Tug Hill. By 1830, Alpha Hovey had finished building a sawmill on Sucker Brook, or Sucker Markham. Shortly thereafter, Schuyler Thompson either built a sawmill on Sucker or purchased silos and began manufacturing whaleboat oars, shipping them inspired to New York City for the ocean-going vessels of that day. Between 1830 and 1860, Lewis County reportedly furnished about 2/3 of the bird's eye maple used in the world, with most of it coming from the Tuck Hill Plateau. 1853, Henry and J.A. Bridgman built a sawmill on Big Alder. Anthony Joint purchased it in 1862. Capacity, one circular saw and edger, 2 million feet per year. In 1871, Henry Allen, Newton North, A. McVicker, and Alva Ward also built a sawmill on Big Alder, naming it the Eureka. In 1878, Hood and Gale, a Michigan company, began logging hardwood, taking it to Port Lyson, and manufactured it into veneer products. Their sawmill was on Doreen Creek, called Michigan Mills. It cut 50,000 feet per day. The big fire of 1889 in Fort Lyden destroyed both Fort Lyden's business section and Hood and Gale's manufacturing site. Their next move was to Missoula, Pennsylvania. Constant Pond, another Michigan-based company, purchased Hood and Gale holdings on Tug Hill. Shortly sold it to Page and Fairchild, an Oswego-based firm. They built the Glenfield and Western Railroad in conjunction with the Dexter Sulfite Pulp and Paper Company. Gould Paper Company purchased Page and Fairchild half of the railroad, and in 1920, William Randolph Hearst purchased the Dexter Sulfite half. Hearst also acquired the Monteola hardwood mills at Glenfield, who manufactured mop handles, sole lath, flooring, and lumber. The plant was doomed to failure, as was its successor, the Keystone Chemical Corporation, in 1926. By the way, I met the vice president of that corporation when I was traveling to the Air Force out at Buffalo, a man by the name of Quinn. In the 1930s and into the 1940s, John E. Johnston, in partnership with Elmer Bernier, logged the last big remaining stand of timber on Tuck Hill, the White Track, owned by Gould Paper Company. Nearly 150,000 cord of pulpwood, cut in 13 feet 4 inches logs. By the way, I think I was about 16 years old. I was on the timber cruise in 1930-31 with Joe McDermott and Billy Impey. And I can tell some interesting stories about that by that time. Of the others who logged Tug Hill were Hogan and McDermott, Mort Jocelyn with Burley Babcock from Keystone, and they had the Pullman cars for camps. Mormon and Rocker, Francis Kirk, and the Kwasniewskis. Now, we are going to call upon the king of the lumberjack, who's going to let us know all we want to know about lumberjacking. My friend Pat O'Brien.
Well, I appreciate what you're doing as far as the history, the local history for logging. I think it's a good idea. Now, I'm not going to do a thing to help it along. I'm just going to tell a few little stories about the logging. Some of them are true, some of them are partly true, some are just outright lies. It's your job to figure out, is that the truth, you know, or is he lying? The main thing, the old-time logging lumber camp, where basically the men's camp was big and long, where you had 50, 75 men in a camp, and then they usually had a little breezeway where the men washed up between the cook camp and the men's camp, and do the baking, the bread, the pies, the donuts. I don't know how they got to do the dishes, right? It was smell of a lumber camp. If you've never been in a lumber camp that had 50, 60 men, that had no facilities, no way of washing, no bedding, and the smell of a lumber camp would clear your sinuses. And then, of course, they had the horse job. They had big horse barns that would take care of 30, 40 head of horses. I used to go at Berniers's. I used to go down to the horse barn each night. Not that I liked horses very well, nor teamsters, but the horse barn smelled so damn much better than the men. I'm not sure now, thinking back 50 years, how well the cooks cooked their food. They had you know, if you were young and worked 10, 12 hours a day in the cold, you could eat stale bread and say it was good. And the cooks, they made a lot of dried fruit in some of the camps. In the camp in North Lake, where there was no way to get in there, they used a lot of apricots, raisins, and prunes. It'd make prune pie, and that's why I thought it was prune. I well remember the prune pie. I love pie and I love prunes. And now we get back to another part of the logging camp, and that was the outhouse. They worked right together. Now, the outhouse didn't have individual seats like you might imagine. They had a peeled pole and a real communal thing. 10, 15 men could get in there and talk things over. There's one camp I stayed in just a short time. There were an awful bunch of big men in that camp. And the man that built the outhouse must have been the biggest one of the lot, because the pole was that high. And I had had prune pie, and I had to get a kind of running jump to get up on it. I'll tell you, my feet wouldn't hit the ground. And if you try to balance yourself on the pole, you better keep your mind on what you're doing. I often think of, now you hear a lot about acid rain, and you hear some old timers tell that 50 years ago you could lay down in any swamp hole and drink all the water you wanted. It was all pure. Well, I want to give you a few arguments about that. Some of that water wasn't as pure as you might think. Charlie Levesque and I went into, Ed knows what Camp Ido. It was on Wolf Creek Outlet.
No, that was Camp 5.
Okay, Camp 5. We got in there, we walked in the rain, and we had food enough for a couple of days. And we had a tent with us, but we got in there, and the only building left was the granary, maybe 6, 8 foot square. And trappers had made a kind of a camp out of the granary, and it was raining, so we went in there and spent the night in the granary. The next morning it was still raining, and you can't paint boundary lines in the rain. So Charlie took a kettle and went out to the creek, and he got a pot with a kettle of water for coffee or washing or brushing our teeth. And I had a little glass there, and I took a glass of this water and held it up to the light. And you never saw so many wigglers and worms and beetles. Some of them went to the top and would float down, and I spent a day just watching them. It was so bad. Now, this is before acid rain. I think the acid rain would have probably been good for that water. It was so bad that Levesque couldn't drink it on Friday. He was a good Catholic. That's one of the truths. I said, well, now, it'll kill you. So I boiled it like a good Boy Scout. And if I'd have been smart enough, I could have made $1 million. That was before the days of the cup of soup. He said, oh, maybe it's a exaggeration. Forget that trip. But there were a lot, one thing I was going to tell you about the camp life, the loggers, they used to lie a lot. They could lie. They had no radios in the first camps. There was no electricity and there were not many battery radios, so you had no way of keeping up with the local news. So if one of the lumberjacks came out, he could make up any kind of lie when he came back in. We remember one old incident, Ed Rutledge had been out, had a few drinks and was back in. And the first thing he said when he got back in camp, that Bill Kinney, Bill was an old timer up on Tug Hill that used to make a little moonshine, and all the lumberjacks knew him, stayed with him a lot. He said Bill Kinney hung himself. Well, if you think that the news about Pearl Harbor was something you should have heard in that lumber camp about Bill Kinney hanging himself. And that's all they talked about in that camp for 2 weeks. A fellow told me, one of the old timers told me, he said, you know, Brian, he said, Bill Kinney never hung himself. I know Bill. Somebody murdered him for his money and hung him. I thought nothing about it. When I came out of the woods, the first one I met with in the streets of Boonville was Bill Kinney. And I said, I heard you hung yourself. Bill said, that's what they said, but I didn't. I want to tell you one story, and that'll be enough. This story, and this one isn't true, but this old lumberjack was getting awful hard of hearing, and he took sick, and he had a virus, and he got quite sick, so his wife took him to the doctor. And she not only took him to the doctor, she went right into the examination room with him. And the doctor got all done. He said, well now, mister, he said, I want a sample of your stool, a specimen of your urine, and a specimen of your semen. And she turned, or he turned to his wife, and he said, he wants what? And the old fellow quite loud said, he wants your underwear.
Steve Whitebat was crowned king of the lumberjack, Woodford's Field Day. I'd like to add just one little anecdote that I've nearly forgotten. I think it's famous history. Yeah, we had a former lumberjack in the area who decided that he wasn't going to get rich being a lumberjack. He was a very well-educated man. Came from Canada, the Canadian country. Great, early man. Loved to smoke big cigars. He had a taxi. His taxi was just for lumberjacks, taking them into camp and out of camp. He added to that selling suits, selling insurance as a lumberjack. He had the lumberjacks all taken care of. And he had had some training in osteopathic medicine, apparently. And he went into camp this day, a friend of mine was Clark here, told me this. And poor little Cookie was out in the kitchen, humped over like this. He said to him, what's the matter? Come over here. He took his cigar out, took a couple puffs on it, put it on the stove. He said, come over here. He put a full Nelson on him and gave him a crack like that. The poor little Cookie fell down the floor. He said, oh, he said, you killed me. He grabbed the cigar out the door, into the taxi, and away, leaving the Cookie there on the floor. I'd like to thank everybody that came here. This is essential history. I hope that we can add to it from time to time. Ed, I'd like to thank you for what you had to say. Howard, for coming all the way down from Inlet. come up here with us. Yes. Yes.
No, I was interested when I started teaching school in 1926, I taught in Fowlerville. Because that's on Moose River, and they were having the log drives there, so in those days, you have 20 minutes after 10 and 10:40 for a play period. So they built the tin camp in Fowlerville that time. It was on the left-hand side of the bridge, you come across it going towards Grandma Burke's place. My grandfather homesteaded there after the Civil War, and he had the farming in the corner. They were way up in that row, way up in the woods, and of course I boarded my grandfather's. And so Westford and Mary Mullen and my Uncle Howard were all driving logs down. So they would go very, very early in the morning, and say at 2 o'clock, and they would go up and get logs. Sometimes be reversed, and they get the logs and bring them down. They come back and they had these big breakfast pancakes and eggs and everything else. Then they go down, and you didn't have to go around the loop. You would cut right outside the school, so you go right down to Lansdale and go right down the hill and left the logs there. They went back and forth all day long. They take about 4 loads of logs down on the big teams. Then my aunt asked me to move out and board Mary Mullen's station. She could take 2 more log drivers in, and they would take the horsemen at night. So at 10:20, we'd run down the bridge, and you would just see them coming way up here. And we'd go down every day until they came right down to the bridge. And I think 2 of your uncles were killed. I had log jam right to the bridge, a great big log jam. We stopped for a couple of days, and they went to dynamite. And the Websters had a house built on the right-hand side of the Fowlerville Bridge. Was it 2 of your uncles were killed or 3? And 2 of her uncles, she used to be Susie Webster. They went out here, how do you go, the Pee-wees there? Then the that's the thing had occurred on, you moved the logs. The Pee-wees, yeah. And they went out and move, and the dynamite took off, and it killed her 2 of her uncles at that time. And we were at the bridge at the time and a half when the kids went. And this little Frenchman, I don't think he was 4 foot high. He'd go by the school about 9 o'clock, 9:15. He'd have a great big pack basketball that wide strap of shorts. And he bent right to it. His head would be down by his knees. He had 2 big blue enamel coffee pots full of hot coffee. He'd go up at 9 o'clock. He'd come back down about 4:40. He would go down to the camp. He'd fill them up again, make more coffee, more, so he'd go back up. He'd come down again about 4:03. And then he started getting supper for the men. And he had to bake a barrel of sugar cookies every night, a barrel of molasses cookies every night, and a barrel of donuts every night. I don't think he weighed 100 pounds. He wasn't 4 foot tall. And he'd be going by every morning, he'd bent by over, right down almost to his knees. And that was a very wonderful experience I had when I taught school in Florida. Lots of log drives from now, but then when they went under the bridge, there was a dam, and they went to Lions Falls from there. That was the last place they did.
That's very good. That's what we should get more of, that type of thing. Because it won't be long before it will be lost.
Geez, Gordon McDonald back there is
In the lumber camps a lot up in Montague.
I used to have to walk 7 miles home on Friday night. And I used to walk right up to the Polish man as far as paying something, and I had to run like everything, get to school at 9 o'clock. Miss Johnson, her aunt, was my superintendent of school. She had to be school at 9 o'clock. But the men come down, one of them in Morrisburg side, he said, wouldn't you like a ride? He said, Lionsdale, you only have 3 miles to walk home in. I said, Rice, on the dogs. You should see me get them on the logs. So all along, I rode the big bag of logs, and when you go down the slip, I just shut my hands like this, and hold on, and then chains are clank, clank, clank. I thought the logs were going to shoot to let me off. So I used to ride the log trucks down the Lanesdale, and get off and walk the other 3 miles home.
But it shouldn't be forgotten.
No.
Especially you want to remember the sample story.
Want to thank Joe for getting this wonderful group together. Thank you, Joe. I know it took a lot of effort and so forth. Thank you, gentlemen and ladies, for coming.
I'd like to thank all these people for coming and
Well, I
listening to
know.
all
So,
that.
you know, they knew they were coming in for a good program, so that's where they came. You're all invited for some coffee, tea, hot chocolate. Oh, yes. This year we put up a logging exhibit over at the museum. And we've had so many good responses on it. We're going to have it again next year. So the museum is closed now. So don't forget it. Next spring, come over and see it. I think you will like it. Pat O'Brien and old Bob Cataldo that's here and a few other people really scoured around and gave us some, or loaned us some very nice things. And we've got some good pictures of the last log drive. Excuse the voice. Now, coffee, tea, or hot chocolate for you if you like. The coffee is decaf, so please come in and have some. I brought over some books. Joe's books are over here. The last book that Luma Holly had written, and also this delightful little one that we just published. It's called Lewis County Narrative, Volume 1. It's on the Higby family. It's a narrative poetry. It's very enjoyable. So they're on sale here. And if anybody would like to join Lewis County Historical Society, we're more than happy to take your money.
If any of your people know any chamber for, they have this list here, if